Hi, and welcome to Crafts with Ash. My name's Ashley, and today I am so excited to share some really amazing last-minute 4th of July DIYs. All of the supplies used were from the Dollar Tree with a few pieces of scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby, and these are so simple yet came out so neat. But first, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, then hit that little notification bell so you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, join me on my Facebook and Instagram so you can join my crafting community. Alright, let's get started. For my first DIY, we are going to start off super easy. So I picked out this little flag hanger that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just ripping it apart by cutting the thread around the edges, and now you have two separate pieces. Next, I just used my hands to flatten one of the pieces of the flag, and then I also pulled out any of the extra thread that was around the edges. After that, I took this cute little white fluffy pillow that I got from the Dollar Tree, and first, I cut off the tags of the pillow, and then I just simply used this fabric glue to glue it on top, and it was that simple. The easiest way I found to do this was put a bunch of glue on the back of that little flag piece and then just use my fingers to smear it all around. Then I placed that flag in the middle of the pillow and pushed down really hard. Now I have had this pillow for a few days now and it seems to be holding up well. So I would say that this glue from the Dollar Tree was pretty good. So I absolutely love how this came out. It was so simple, and it's perfect to add to some main pillows that might be on your couch that you already have, just to give it that little touch of patriotism. So my only regret was not grabbing another pillow to do another one. But what do you think? For my next DIY, I'm going to start off with 3 of these galvanized stars that I got from the Dollar Tree and this star sign that also came from the Dollar Tree. The first thing I did was rip off all the stars from the burlap fabric, and now I'm just sanding it down really well to get rid of all the glitter but also bring out the natural board underneath to bring out that rustic look. Next, by using this 3D pop-up tape that I got from the Dollar Tree, I'm going to glue down or tape the colored stars on top of the galvanized stars. So I just cut off a few strips and laid them onto the colored stars, and then I'm going to push them right in the middle of the galvanized stars to give it that 3D look. Next, by using my Waverly Antique Wax from Walmart and my favorite distressing brush, I'm going to distress the edges and a little bit in the middle of the colored stars and the galvanized stars to give it a rustic touch. Now, if you do not like the rustic looks, you can absolutely skip this step. It's totally up to you, and it's whatever you like. I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you to my channel. If you are new here, thank you so much for choosing to stop by. I really hope that you enjoy what you see and that you love all of these DIYs. And if you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. I truly appreciate your support and love every single one of my subscribers. And reading all your comments, I am working my way through answering all of them, but thank you so much for all of your amazing support on my channel. Let's get back to the DIYs. Next, I took a makeup sponge in the Waverly Antique Wax and I went around the edges of the galvanized star to highlight those and make them just a little bit darker. After that, I took these letters that I got from the Dollar Tree and I put a U on the red letter, an S on the white letter, and an A on the blue letter. Then, after I had them all positioned how I liked, I took my sanding block and I very lightly sanded over the letters so that they weren't so bold. Then I went over each one of the stars with some Mod Podge to protect the letters from coming up. While my stars were drying, I took this galvanized bucket that I got from the Dollar Tree and I stuck some floral foam at the bottom. Now I did end up hot gluing these down, but they actually fit and were wedged right in perfectly, so I didn't really have to use a lot of hot glue, but I did hot glue the top piece to the bottom piece so that it wouldn't move. After that, I took these dowel rods and by using my super glue and my hot glue, I attached the dowel rods to the back of the stars. The reason why I use the super glue too is because hot glue and metal do not work. They do not mix. So I put some super glue there, that way it held it down. Then I took some of my silver duct tape and I put a little strip of that to give it some extra support. I repeated this step on both of my other stars. After that, I took some black acrylic paint and I painted the dowel rods on every one of my stars. I find it easier to paint the dowel rods when they are already glued down. That way it doesn't get your fingers all messy because you have to hold the dowel rod. So now I'm able to just hold the star and just paint without making a huge mess. But I went ahead and painted all three of my dowel rods. After they dried, I stuck them in the foam, and I apologize, the angle here is not going to be great because it was hard for me to do it, but I will show you what it looks like. But basically, I put the U and the A in the back and then the S in the front. After that, I took these smaller pieces of twine and I made 3 bows, and I'm going to hot glue those to the dowel rod where the dowel rod meets the star, if that makes sense. So right underneath the galvanized piece. Again, it was hard for me to do this as these pieces were laying down, so I had to stand it up, but I will show you what it looks like. I did add a twine bow to all of the stars. Before I did that though, I went ahead and I added some hot glue to the holes of the foam so that way my dowel rods didn't move. After that, I took this bow that I got from the Dollar Tree, and after removing it from its packaging, I realized that the tails might have been a little too long. So I just detached the band that wrapped around, took out the tails, and hot glued it back together. After that, I added a ton of hot glue to the back of the bow and I hot glued that to the twine part of my bucket. And here is what it looks like. Then I went ahead and took my little foam pieces that I got from the Dollar Tree and I put a little white star in the middle just to add a little bit more detail. Next, I took my Waverly Antique wax and just rubbed it over the bow. That way it gave it that rustic look. Then I went in with my makeup sponge and the Waverly Antique wax and just kind of blotted it around the bucket to give it that rusty look. So I would just dab it in random places and then kind of use my finger to smear it just a little bit, and I really love the touch that this added. After that, I decided it kind of did need tails in the front, so all I did was cut them down and then hot glue it to the back of the bow. And I'm so glad I did that because it really did make the bow look complete. After that, I took some Spanish moss and I put it in my bucket to cover up all the foam, and that completed this really cute star sign. What do you think? For this third DIY, I'm going to use this wooden mason jar in the coloring kit from the Dollar Tree. Now I am going to be using the back of it, so I took this piece of scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby and I simply Mod Podged that paper down to the bottom part of the mason jar. So I made sure not to trace out the top where the lid would be, but I went ahead and traced out the bottom and then cut it out. Then by using Mod Podge, I spread it over the bottom of my mason jar and put my piece of paper right on top. You want to make sure to have a nice even layer and then push down really hard. Once I had the paper onto my mason jar, I took my sanding block and I sanded the edges to give it that nice clean edge. Now when you do this, you want to make sure to sand in the down direction to give it a clean cut. After that, I put some Mod Podge on the top of the paper, so that way it makes it seem like it's all one piece and it's all cohesive. After that, I took my hot glue gun and I just started putting strips of hot glue on the top where the jar would be. I saw this method from Cindy over at Monarch Mom DIY and I thought that it was genius. She did this to add the ridges, and then in a minute you're going to see that I'm going to add aluminum foil to make it look like the lid. But you have to make sure that your strips of glue dry completely, or else of course they'll just smear. Now I did do 2 strips, so I kind of coated it twice. That way it was thicker and would really stand out. So once your glue is completely dry, this is when you're going to take that aluminum foil, and what I did was I just pushed it on top, and now I'm taking my finger and really pushing in where the glue is, so that way it makes those distinct ridges. After that, I'm going to cut off the foil, that way it fits on my jar. After I had the piece of aluminum foil I wanted, I took my Mod Podge and I lightly coated. Now you don't want to push down on the hot glue because you want to make sure that the ridges stay there, and then you're going to put your aluminum foil back on top. Now of course you could just cut down your aluminum foil first and then do the Mod Podge, but I don't know why I didn't do that. I just decided that's what I did. And then as far as the edges, I just wrapped them around to the back and then cut off any excess aluminum foil and pushed it down really hard so that way the front was all adhered. Then to add a little detail, I took my black paint marker and I just added some squiggly lines and dots around the perimeter of the bottom of my mason jar. Next, I took some twine and starting in the back, I added some hot glue, and then I'm going to wrap my twine around where the aluminum foil and the scrapbook paper meet. Now, I had smaller pieces of twine, so I had to kind of, glue them together, but I just wrapped it around a few times. That way it hid where the foil and the scrapbook paper came together. Then I took one more piece of twine and wrapped it around the back, bringing it to the front, and then I just tied it in a simple knot. I did hot glue the tails down, that way they stayed put. After that, I took these foam stars, and I do have 2 stars glued to the front of that mason jar, but you're going to see I'm going to take them off, so I didn't even show that. But I took some wire that I had left over from a different craft and cut off a small piece and then wrapped it around my pencil to make it a curly piece of wire. Then I simply popped one of the foam stars on top of the wire. Then I'm going to glue it in the back, and I'm going to do 3 of them. So I'm going to have a white star, a blue star, and a red star. Now I did add some hot glue in the foam star, that way my wire would stay in the star. Now the blue star and the red star do look a little different because those I actually got off of a floral pick from the Dollar Tree, but you can definitely use that foam scatter that is in the 4th of July section at the store. So I did this to 3 of my stars, and then in a second you'll see that I hot glued them to the back of my mason jar, so that way the stars came up from the top. Now to glue them down, I did use a generous amount of hot glue. That way the wire stuck to the back of the foil, and I just arranged them. I put the two on the end a little higher and then the white one a little shorter because I really loved how that looked. Then to make it more secure, I did add a thin piece of duct tape to the back to help hold it down. Then I took one of the smaller white foam stars and I cut it in half so that way they were both flat on the back, and I hot glued one to each of my tails. I also believe I forgot to mention that I added a twine bow to the front of my twine as well. But I made sure to hot glue those down, that way they stayed, and then I cut off the extra twine hanging from the bottom. Then, of course, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my makeup sponge and I went around the edges and a little bit in the middle of my whole piece. And then I also dabbed it on the aluminum to give it that rusty look. I also went over all of the stars as well. Then to complete this, I took this USA foam letter from that pack from the Dollar Tree and I put it at the corner in the bottom of my mason jar and then went over it with some Waverly Antique Wax. And also you can see here that I took those stars off the aluminum because I just felt that it hid it, and I think that the aluminum adds a really cool touch, so I wanted it to be more seen. So then I took the Waverly Wax and I added more of that to the foil to give it more of the rusty look, and then I hit the twine with some hot glue. That way it covered the foil and the paper meeting. After that, I took two tumbling tower blocks and I glued them together end to end, and then I hot glued it to the bottom of my sign to make it a standing sign. Then I took two more, and to give it extra support, I hot glued those on top of the ones that were already glued down. And that finished off this really cute mason jar DIY. I really love this. It was so simple to make and it's perfect for the 4th of July. What do you think? For my next DIY, I'm going to use this box sign that I got from the Dollar Tree, and after I removed it from its packaging, I'm going to use my hairdryer and my scraper tool to try to lift up that frame around the inside. Now, this is made out of cardboard, so it did bend, unfortunately, but I did want to use it, so I just carefully tried to get that off. After that, I put a good amount of Mod Podge on the top of my sign and around the sides because I'm going to be taking a piece of scrapbook paper, but I want the whole box sign to be covered. So what I did was I started at one side and then I Mod Podged it down, and then I just flipped it over. So if you can see it, so it's covering, but you do want to make sure that you leave paper on either ends too. That way it's going to cover the entire thing. Then I went ahead and folded it over and cut off any of the excess paper. Now to help me glue the sides, I cut slits in every corner, and then basically you're just going to wrap it like a present. So I cut the slits, and now I'm going to put Mod Podge on one of the shorter sides, just like that. Then I'm going to press the paper on top. Now as far as the corner, you're going to put them underneath the longer strip. So I did the shorter sides first, and then you can see I'm Mod Podging the corners around, and then I'm going to put the longer sides on top. top. And then I'm going to cut off any excess paper. I hope that made sense. Next, to give me those nice clean edges, I took my sanding block and I sanded all of the excess paper around the sides down. After that, I'm going to take this other piece of scrapbook paper and I'm going to cut off a little piece long enough to fit the word America from that little foam sheet right there. So I measured it out and then I cut it down, and then that's going to go in the middle of that black frame. So I just kind of positioned it, and after I had it how I liked, I went ahead and put the word America in the middle of that piece of paper. After that, I decided I really didn't like the nice cut clean edges, so I ripped around the word just to give it a little bit more rustic detail, and I'm so glad I did because I ended up loving how that looked. After that, I Mod Podged my piece of paper in the middle of my box sign, and then I'm going to hot glue the frame around it. Then, to give it even more detail, I took these silver thumbtacks that I got from the Dollar Tree and I pushed one in every corner. Now this will go in the cardboard, you just have to use a little muscle. But after they were all pushed down in the corners, I finished this piece off by taking my Waverly Antique Wax and brushing over the word America and brushing over each one of those tacks as well. This is your friendly reminder that if you're loving what you see so far, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Not only does it help my channel to grow, but it also tells YouTube that you're loving my content and that you want to see more, so they'll put more of my videos in your home screen, and then you can catch even more DIYs. So don't forget to give me a like. I would truly appreciate it. So after I was done applying all the Waverly Antique Wax, that completed this really cute sign. And the beauty of this is that you could either use it as a standing sign or you can hang it because it is open on the back. So you don't have to add a hanger or anything. You can just throw it on a nail or a command hook and it's perfect to display for the 4th of July. Now, does this not scream America and patriotism? It is so red, white, and blue and I love it. But what do you think? For my 4th DIY, I'm going to start off with this framed picture from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to remove the plastic and then pull off the foam flower that was on the front. After that, I'm going to take out the back of the photo. Then by using this scrapbook paper, I'm going to Mod Podge it down on the picture. Now you want to make sure to put a nice thin and even layer all over and make sure to get those edges as well. After my paper is adhered down, I take my little knife and I cut around the edges. And then I'm going to go back over it with my sanding block to get any excess paper off and give it that nice clean cut. After that, I'm going to take this USA coloring kit that I also got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to give this a really good coat of white Waverly chalk paint. Once my paint was dry, I took this washi tape and I'm going to tape off a square at the corner of the map, and I bet you know where we're going with this. Then once it's all taped off, I'm going to take my Ocean Waverly chalk paint and I'm going to paint the inside of that square. I'm also going to make sure to get the edges of it as well. Once that was dry, I removed the washi tape and I put it back, but on the inside of the square. Then I'm going to take more washi tape and I'm going to cut off some strips to make the stripes on our flag. Now, because I wanted my first stripe to be red at the top, I went ahead and put a spacer piece there and then started making my little strips underneath that. Now, when I got to the bottom where Texas and Florida are, it was a little harder to put just one full strip of tape down, so I did have to put a couple different strips, which you'll see in 1 second. Then I went ahead and wrapped the tape around the sides. That way I didn't get any paint on those sides either. Now here's when I decide just to cut in the middle of Texas and Florida and just give them their own piece of tape because it just stuck better like that. Then after all of my tape was on and pressed on very well, I went ahead and took my crimson Waverly chalk paint and I painted all of my stripes. After that was dry, I went ahead and I peeled up all of my tape. Now, for some reason, and I always do this, my red stripes are not connecting to the blue, so I just took some paint and I just made some touch-ups. After that, I took my white paint marker and I simply just drew on some stars. After that, I took my sanding block and I sanded the whole thing down really well. Now again, if you do not like the rustic look, you can absolutely skip this step. But you know me, I love the rustic look, so I definitely wanted to sand it down. Then after that, I took my makeup sponge and my Waverly Antique Wax and I went around the edges of the USA, and then I also hit the middle of it as well. I also wanted to distress the frame, so I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I hit the sides of that as well. After that was dry, I replaced the back of the picture into the frame, and then by using 2 tumbling tower blocks, I hot glued those on either side of the map, and then I hot glued that in the middle of my scrapbook paper. After that, I took these rub-on words that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I cut out the word home that is on that sheet. Now I decided to personalize this a little bit, and since I live in Ohio, I took this little heart confetti piece that I had from Valentine's Day and I put it where Ohio would be, and then I took that rub-on word and rubbed it on right underneath the heart. Now to do this, I did use a craft stick and it seemed to work out pretty well. Then I hot glued the heart down, and because the heart is red and the stripe is red, I took my white paint marker and I colored the heart white. Now it's going to look pink here because somehow I got some red paint on my white paint marker, but I do go back and fix it. Now when I pulled off the transfer, some of my letters did get messed up, so I just took a black permanent marker and made some touch-ups, and after that, this was complete. I love this, but what do you think? For my last DIY, I started off with this set of 2 bandanas, and I happened to find a set that had a blue bandana and a red bandana, and after cutting them apart, I just cut out stars. Now, here's the thing, I changed my mind halfway through, so I'm not actually going to be using those stars as stars, but I will be using the fabric. So just cut off strips of the bandanas. Then I took this extra fabric that I had from a scarf, and you'll be seeing that DIY in just a little bit, couple more videos, but I also cut off pieces of that scarf as well. I didn't even measure, just random pieces, lengths, and sizes. After that, I took this twine and I started tying all of the fabric pieces onto the twine. So what I did was I folded it in half and then looped the open side through the looped side. And I would do one scarf piece and then one red star. Now, like I said, I'm not using them as stars. Now they're just scrap pieces of fabric. But I did this until I ran out of scarf pieces and red pieces, and I did not use the blue stars yet. After that, I used these little triangle pieces that I had left over from another DIY, and they're just made out of scrapbook paper, and I Mod Podged the blue stars onto the little pendants. Now you want to make sure to put a good amount of Mod Podge on there because fabric is a little thicker, so it is going to need more Mod Podge. And then once it was adhered down, I put Mod Podge on the top of the fabric. That way it would harden and make it feel like one whole piece. But I did this to 3 different triangles. After that, I took my scissors and I cut off any of the extra fabric around my triangle. Next, I took the sheet of stickers from the Dollar Tree and I painted an A, an S, and a U. I'm going to be putting these letters over the blue bandana, and I knew the black wouldn't really show well, so I painted them white so they would really pop. While those were drying, I took my triangles and I hot glued a small piece of twine in each corner at the top. Now the reason why I glued this twine onto the triangles is that way I can loop it over the twine of my banner, and that way I can move around these triangles to make sure they're positioned how I liked. So after the twine was glued on, I put the pendant in the front of my banner, and then I just wrapped the twine around my banner and hot glued it down. That way it made a loop, and I did this for all 3 of my triangles. After that, I placed my letters on top of my little triangles, spelling out USA. Then, to protect my letters, I gave each of them a coat of Mod Podge. Finally, to add one little final touch, I took these pop-up stickers and I painted 6 of them with my white Waverly chalk paint. Once they were dry, I peeled them off and I hot glued 1 to each corner of my triangles. And that completed this little garland, and I absolutely love how this came out. It's not very long, but you can spread out all the pieces and have the whole thing go over a mantle or on a hutch or over a cabinet. But I really love how this came out, and I love that it was made basically out of scraps that I already had at home. But what do you think? I am loving how all of these projects came out today. I think they are so patriotic. They all cost less than $5. Some of them were even just $1, and this one was practically free since I used everything that I already had in my stash. I didn't have to buy anything to create this banner. But I just love all of these. They are so patriotic. I do have to say, I think my favorite is going to be the USA map that has Ohio. Not just because it's customized, but I really love the rustic look, but it's also very modern looking as well. But you're going to have to let me know down in the comments which one was your absolute favorite. I really loved creating these, and I really hope that you were inspired and got some great ideas on some last minute USA or patriotic DIYs that you can do just in time for the 4th of July. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that little notification bell. That way you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, like I said, if you loved what you saw today, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. I would truly appreciate it because it really helps my channel to grow. Well, until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!